Good morning, good evening, or happy middle of the night to the folks all over the world. Today on Conversations with Jack, we have Marko Baricevic, who is an engineer at Interchain Berlin. But before we talk to Marko, I just want to go ahead and say thank you to our sponsors, Sommelier Finance, which is making the world better for liquidity providers. It's a project that actually both Marko and I are working on right now. So thank you, Tariq and marketing. And then secondly, I'd like to also thank the team over at OmniFlix Media who helps me produce these podcasts, and especially Sisla, who is very awesome to jump on at all kinds of random hours with me. So on this call, we have Sisla, who's in the background helping in India, Marko in Berlin, and Jack on the west coast of the United States. So truly all over the world. Thank you guys very much for joining us. So Marko, do you want to give yourself a quick little intro and tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing at Interchain Berlin right now?
Yeah, definitely. So like Jack said, I'm Marko. Currently, I work at Interchain Berlin alongside Fede, last week's guest or last episode's guest.
Yeah.
And with many guests that will most likely be coming up on the show. Over there, I do
in 2 weeks.
Okay, there we go. So over there, I mainly do development on Tendermint Core, the underlying consensus and networking engine of the Cosmos SDK. But alongside that, I also shift up and down the stack. So I kind of appear in the Cosmos SDK every so often, help out on some implementation stuff, help out on many discussions, and then I kind of disappear back down into the lower levels of the Cosmos world.
Yeah, one of the features that you're working on that you're sort of helping coordinate, and we can talk a little bit more about product management later, is the sparse Merkle tree stuff that the Lazy Ledger folks are working on. And that's a great example of something that touches a bunch of layers of the stack, because you need to understand the Tendermint side of it and ensure that you have all of the necessary pieces down there. But the actual implementation of the data store happens up in the Cosmos SDK, right?
Yeah, that's definitely something that many people don't fully understand within the Cosmos land, is that state between Tendermint and the application is actually entirely separate. It makes it more interesting, but it makes it definitely more difficult to do some optimizations.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit harder from a mental model perspective, but I think that the initial architecture of Tendermint was very smart to make it that way.
Yes, definitely. Separation of concerns and led to the simplicity of Tendermint and kind of the allowing developers to develop applications.
Yeah. So Marko, you also worked with me at Tendermint Inc., all in bets, and then were working in blockchains before that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what brought you to the chains?
Yeah, definitely. So I actually moved to Europe and was kind of looking around what I can do in Europe as a job. And I was studying business at the time, and I found coding. And at the time, I believe it was 2016, 2017, and my friend started making extreme amounts of money in blockchain in the ICO boom. And so I kind of looked at it, and I'm very risk adverse, so I didn't just throw a bunch of money in. And so I actually joined some Telegram chats, and I was kind of the person in there that everyone was asking questions about, what's going on in this team's technology stack? I was the GitHub looker upper. And then I quickly learned how to think about blockchains and everything, and got really interested and moved to Berlin. And then soon after that, I figured out that Berlin was kind of a blockchain hub. And at that time, I went to a blockchain enterprise consultancy. Blockchain and enterprise don't really go together then and now.
That was the era of Bitcoin blockchain not Bitcoin, back in sort of end of 2016, early 2017.
Yeah, exactly. And worked in enterprise blockchain for a while. Had a lot of fun. Worked with some big names, MasterCard, Visa. Did some early prototyping. It was a lot of fun because every 3 weeks, it was kind of like a hackathon. We had to just pump out blockchain products. And most of it was actually using Quorum from JP Morgan. And a colleague and I were actually big proponents of shifting to the Cosmos stack, just because of the simplicity, and it just worked. And then the CEO was kind of against it because he was saying it's harder to sell to enterprises if it's not JP Morgan backed and stuff like this. And at that point, I started trying to get a job at AIB, at that Tendermint Inc. And soon after that, a couple months later, I joined the team, started mostly working on the SDK, and then shifted down to Tendermint.
Yeah, JP Morgan Quorum, something you hear nothing about these days. That was basically just a fork of Geth, right?
Yeah, it was basically a fork just with proof of authority, and then like a secondary network for private transactions. But it was like not really private in the way we talk about private nowadays.
Yeah, JP Morgan just forking things and throwing their logo on it feels a lot like AWS's use of open source software. It's going to be really interesting to see what banks do going forward. I think with the number of exchanges on the SDK, I think there will be a lot of adoption there, if I had to guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think one thing that's kind of hidden from the Cosmos ecosystem and this kind of like smaller Tendermint ecosystem is that the Cosmos stack, Tendermint alone or with the Cosmos SDK, is actually used a lot within enterprises. And this is something everyone's kind of focused on, these public networks, but private Cosmos SDK chains, there's actually quite a few of them that aren't really well known.
That's a really interesting point. Back to the point that 2016 was kind of the era of blockchain, not Bitcoin. That was at that time, Bucky and Jay, who were basically most of the team, had put all of their energy into selling Tendermint to enterprises.
Yeah.
And when that effort failed, that's when they put together the white paper for Cosmos. But Tendermint is really naturally built to be an enterprise blockchain in a lot of ways, which I think is cool.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think Bucky and Jay kind of started out this whole movement in enterprise, and also now the research arm. And that research arm is kind of pushing a bit more into enterprise. Like I feel like there's a lot more enterprise teams coming out of the woodworks that are looking at Tendermint and the Cosmos SDK, just because, for one, it's proven to work and it's verifiably proven as well.
When I was working in InfluxDB, which is it was an upstart database company at the time, that database had been around for 4 or 5 years, and we sold exclusively to enterprises, the time series database, not blockchains.
Yeah.
So, the type of thing that you sell to enterprises. And I had a bunch of people that I was selling to tell me it's hard to get a database adopted if it hasn't been around for 10 years and you can't do migrations and have all these, nice to haves. And, Tendermint's only been around for 5 years, seeing a lot of strong production use, and it's starting to get a lot of those sort of nice peripheral features. And actually, one of the things that you've been working on is a huge thing that's going to bring Tendermint forward, which is the P2P refactor. You've been a part of that effort, right?
Yeah, so definitely I've been participating in many conversations. There's a lot of design work to be put into the P2P. It's been led primarily by Eric. He recently joined CockroachDB, and now Bez is leading the refactor of phase 1 of this P2P refactor. And this P2P refactor will drastically modularize what can be done with Tendermint on the P2P layer, but also increase throughput throughout Cosmos and Tendermint.
So talk to me a little bit about the history of the Tendermint P2P. That was kind of strung together and then just left, right? But one of the weird things about it is it just works.
Yeah, I mean, it's of recently, so leading the effort on the protobuf migration Tendermint, I kind of learned that Tendermint is kind of protobuf in the blockchain world. It may not be the fastest, but it works and you can easily rely on it. And so that's kind of the analogy that I've been using of recently. And yeah, the P2P is something, it's an interesting, I don't want to say monster, but part of the code base that many people have veered into, and many people have done small time refactors, but the overall design, while modular, has kind of led people into very deep rabbit holes very quickly. And so
yeah, I guess it's kind of been my understanding that with a peer-to-peer network, you can work really hard and do a lot of proofs, or you can just spray and pray and send a ton of messages and it's probably going to work.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the Tendermint P2P is very simple. We just use a normal gossip mechanism. And we don't have the form of service discovery, which is something we want to work on in the coming months. And so like over the next couple of months, the amount of features and the amount of improvements, not only to the P2P layer, but also to Tendermint in general, will make Tendermint look 100% different.
What are some of the things that you're most excited about on that side of things?
So I think the most exciting for me is the refactor of the mempool. So Tendermint's mempool is notorious for being a simple FIFO list. And this, while fine in many use cases, now as blockchains are getting kind of more adoption, more transactions, the use cases of what a mempool should do or should be able to do is actually growing. And so having a simple FIFO, first in, first out, is not actually beneficial. Many applications need to be able to order transactions or like prioritize specific transactions that are based on adversarial behavior, possibly.
So when you're talking about a simple FIFO, you're just talking about a queue. And when things come on, they come on the end. And when you pull them off the front. And, you know, with mempool design, that doesn't allow for any kind of prioritization, messages with more fees. Not really. Yeah. So with a priority, are we going with a priority queue? Or is it like a...
There's
you can tell me.
There's an open discussion on this because there's multiple avenues that we can go down. And I think the simplest is just adding a priority mechanism into ABCI that gets returned by the application. But I think the amount of use cases that opens is definitely a lot, but we will get limited very quickly. And so I'm actually a bigger proponent of lifting the entire prioritization up to the application. And so in this case, basically the mempool in Tendermint is a simple map. No ordering is done in Tendermint. And when the application checks the transaction, it says, okay, like when I as a proposer want to propose a block, I as a proposer will ask the application what transactions should I include next. And so this allows the application to also quickly prioritize, but also have more granular prioritization.
That's interesting. So the application mempool design could be upgraded without a fork too, and users could run forked versions of the application mempool design, correct?
Yeah, I mean so like even in today's world, like every validator or every node could run their own like custom mempool design. It just won't be taken advantage of by the validators. So I as a validator could write a simple mempool that looks for the highest gas fees in the mempool and then specifically picks those out while when I'm a proposer myself. So this sort of like MEV, minor extracted value, can already be done.
Yeah.
But on some chains,
pretty hard. Where would you have to? Where in Tendermint would you have to edit to do that? I'm just interested because I run a couple of validators.
Yeah, definitely. It would kind of have to be a side process because you'd have to decode the transactions that are in the mempool. But then in consensus, when you are calling the mempool to feed you transactions, instead of calling the mempool, you would essentially just call that side process to feed you the transactions with the highest fees.
That's interesting. And because you would need to decode the messages to understand what's in them, moving it up to the application layer makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what I'm a bigger proponent of. This kind of goes alongside the proposed improvements from Sika for ABCI++. And so that will kind of go hand in hand with that and unlock a multitude of new features.
That's another huge improvement coming to Tendermint that I think a lot of folks who follow Cosmos are like, ABCI++, what is this ABCI thing? Do you want to talk a little bit about that feature?
Yeah,
because
definitely.
This is one that's been a really active conversation and I have even had trouble following.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a presentation by Dev that he did in the last Cosmos conference for a more detailed description if you want to go watch. But in short, it's basically changing the ABCI, and the ABCI is essentially the part of Tendermint that communicates to the application. And in this case, since Tendermint does not know what transactions mean or what, or who's a validator, or how a validator update happens, this all comes from the application. And so this ABCI is written in protobuf in orders for applications to be written in any language. And so in the Cosmos SDK's case, this is written in Go, and it's communicating to Tendermint saying, hey, these transactions are valid, these transactions are invalid. These are the next validator sets for this is the next validator set for the next block. This is how I want you to say handle this. And so it's basically instructing Tendermint on what to do. Tendermint in short is kind of only a consensus and P2P tool. Otherwise, everything else is kind of being instructed by the application. And so with ABCI++, what essentially we're doing is when the proposer proposes a block, he asks the application for some data, for some validation of the block. And in some cases, if you're using a specific curve key algorithm, like let's say Schnorkel, you're able to aggregate all the signatures of the transactions into one signature, allowing for higher throughput for deliver transactions at the end of the finalization process. And then in the middle, on specific vote and commit phases, you're also enabling validators to actually vote on what's in the block, so they can invalidate a block that possibly has invalid transactions or has invalid data, instead of how right now, where we kind of trust the proposer to be proposing the block correctly.
A valid block. That's really interesting. You know, that the cryptography stuff, like, I think one thing that's hard for people to understand is as soon as people start talking cryptography, a lot of people's eyes just glaze over. But what Marko's saying is actually really exciting, because one of the huge bottlenecks in Cosmos SDK applications in terms of throughput and performance, and these things matter when you see something like Terra launching Anchor Protocol and seeing tons and tons of traffic. And they're seeing a little bit of slowness and performance degradation on the chain. And there's other folks where this is starting to happen, and these are the types of performance improvements that we're going to need to make to get out in front of that. But instead of having to check potentially a couple hundred signatures within a block, and right now the way that ABCI works, we're actually checking those signatures multiple times. This will go down to one check for all the signatures in that one block. And these types of like asymmetric performance improvements are how we stay ahead of scaling when there's a huge influx of people coming in. And I just wanted, because like you brushed over that, but that's a really cool feature that makes a huge difference in the lives of users when the chains are under distress. And that's when people really want to see them perform the most, because they're blockchains. They're supposed to be super resilient and really hardy.
Exactly. I mean, like the most recent Stargate release already had like a twofold, threefold increase in performance across the board, not only in Tendermint, but also the SDK. And I think every major release that we will see come from Tendermint, and possibly that the SDK, will see the same performance improvements for the next couple of releases. I mean, the signature aggregation is only one of the performance benefits, performance kind of, not necessarily hacks, but features that you can do. But there's a whole multitude that is unlocked with ABCI++.
So, Marko is talking a lot about work across some really disparate areas within the code base. And this sort of points to what Marko's real job is, in my opinion. He bills himself as a software engineer, but he's much more of a product manager. And by that, I mean someone, you're writing issues, making sure that developers are, aware of things that are going on in other pieces of the ecosystem that might impact their work. You're helping run sprints. You're even writing code too. But really driving these really disparate projects that you have, that you're focused on, forward across the entire stack. And, that's a role that I played for a long time. And there's a few folks like you, me, Zucky, and a few other folks within the ecosystem who kind of do this type of work. I want you to talk about what it's been like for you, because it's kind of crazy. I find it really fun.
Yeah, I definitely find it really, really fun. It's always exciting to be bringing new ideas and pushing new ideas like forward, and kind of watching something that either I thought of or I heard someone think of in discussion or open an issue on, and like pushing it through to the end. I think there, I mean, a good example is like some new issues that kind of popped up on the SDK where someone opened a PR that's like 90% of the way there, and there's a lot of teams waiting for it. And so I'm just kind of jumping in and kind of pushing that last 10% in order for either a team to launch or for less assumptions to be made in different modules. And so it's very interesting. Sometimes you kind of look at it and you're like, why isn't this making sense to anyone but me? But then after like some discussion with people, everyone's like, oh yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah, I think that the value that we bring is like, I think it's really easy as an engineer to get siloed on an individual problem and be like, oh man, how do I solve this? And to miss some obvious things that are just right in your peripheral vision. Yeah. And the value that Marko has always brought to discussions that I've been in is like bringing in some of these like disparate viewpoints and, things that are close at hand, and trying to help use those to solve the problem. And it's really cool.
I'd say like the biggest part that like you and Zachy especially do is kind of like we get out there and like talk to the users. And not only that, but we've all run nodes on multiple networks. We've seen like what issues other networks are running into. We're active in other chats, not only Cosmos chats. And so we're able to see like, oh, there's a bug here. Like these people are running into this issue. Let's try and like bring that back and figure out how to solve it. So I think that's a lot of kind of what we do.
That really brings up a great point in like understanding the broader competitive ecosystem and how important that is for deciding like prioritization and working through things. This week we saw IBC launch, and we're also seeing this ongoing incredible explosion of Ethereum DeFi, and Ethereum price is at record highs as we're talking today. How do you see this, the next 6 months of Cosmos going? We're going to have this DEX coming in, and this DeFi ecosystem is really going to start to bootstrap strongly in connecting these disparate pieces. What are you most excited about over the next few months? What are some things you're looking forward to building?
That's kind of like what I've been thinking about a lot lately. Like the enablement of IBC kind of unlocks a whole new paradigm that no one's really thought about, and like many teams have yet to explore. And
we've been thinking for a couple of years.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the biggest thing is kind of building, like right now you have these teams that are launching kind of DeFi ecosystems on a single chain. And kind of the most interesting thing in my mind is like building a DeFi ecosystem that spans multiple chains, but could be possibly like secured by a single chain, or they all have their own validator sets and they're all like participating in some way to grow a larger ecosystem. So in many cases, like these ecosystems are kind of like funneled into a single entity or a single kind of like visionary person. And I think that's something that's not really
decentralized.
Not decentralized. Like within the Cosmos ecosystem, we kind of like take it even further for decentralization, not only on the chain, but also in companies. And so like just kind of following that and making like allowing multiple people to launch their own chains, but not having it be kind of commandeered by a single person or a single entity. And I think that's the most exciting. As for like what I'm most excited to work on, well, first it's like kind of Sommelier and like the work that's being done there. There's definitely some exciting stuff. And right now I'm doing some cleanup refactor on the Gravity Bridge to help improve that with the Althea team. But after that, I'm most excited for like kind of building out the vision of SOM, not only on SOM as its own chain, but also as side chains to SOM or that are communicating with SOM. The most exciting kind of like DeFi product for me is this cross-chain yield aggregation and cross-chain like ETF story. And so my thought process there is everyone's taking advantage of this yield aggregation on Ethereum. And that's a huge, huge economy there. But there's still this kind of gap in all these products are going to be launching with their own chains pretty soon. And there's no way to like aggregate yield across all of them.
Yeah. I think that one of the interesting things there is in Ethereum, every block gets executed synchronously. So when you're programming, you're basically on a single threaded CPU.
Yeah.
There's languages like Rust and Go, which have these, different models to manage concurrent processes and asynchronous communication. And as we move from this single-threaded Ethereum environment to this multi-threaded, multi-chain environment, like learning how to do this stuff in an asynchronous manner is really where the difficulty is going to be.
Yeah.
And, I think what we're working on with building tools for liquidity providers for Uniswap v3 right now, like those learnings are really going to help inform a lot of other things. Like how are we going to build, indexes of different staked assets across Cosmos? Or, Thorchain is a really exciting chain. They've got a lot of different DeFi products on Thorchain. How do we maybe take some of those and aggregate those with maybe some products over on Terra? And, the technology to build these kind of applications is where we're working right now. And a lot of it's like, this boring, really deep, like, how do we add Snorkel to do signature aggregation in Tendermint? And like, let's talk about sparse Merkle trees. But it's all like all of this work that we're doing and all of these little threads that Marko's weaving together is to build this like broader DeFi platform and build this programming model that enables these really, really exciting applications, which is what the promise of Cosmos is. And, that is, I think, a very hard perspective to get to for a lot of folks.
Definitely.
And I think one of the things I've always like admired about you, Marko, and one of the reasons I've really loved working with you is because you do see all of those little pieces and kind of how they fit together.
It's almost, so like, I definitely feel like I have really bad scatterbrain, but in such a like ecosystem
Cheers.
where there's like everything going on in so many different areas, I feel like having a scatterbrain is actually like a benefit because you're able to like follow so many different things and able to keep track of like what other even ecosystems are doing. And so It's definitely, I'd say, a benefit to myself.
Yeah, I think one of the other ecosystems that's super prominent in Berlin is the Polkadot ecosystem and Rust. And you've got a lot of friends and folks in that ecosystem. And it's been, for as much as folks think about how competitive we are with them and all of this stuff, and people constantly put Cosmos and Polkadot up next to each other, the amount of collaboration and sort of cross-pollination between those two ecosystems is huge.
Yeah, definitely here in Berlin. Like I live right around the corner. Like the Interchain Berlin office is 5 minutes to the left of me, and the Parity office is 5 minutes to the right of me. And so it's just kind of like a small ecosystem, especially in Berlin. And we all get along. We all talk. I have a lot of friends at Parity, and we always talk on like what's coming up next, what's most exciting, and many ideas that I'm pondering in the Cosmos ecosystem. It's like I talk with through them, and then we implement it, and then they also implement it, and vice versa. So it's definitely a very much so collaborative environment.
The core technologies that sort of underlie all these platforms in terms of cryptography, peer-to-peer engineering, like consensus engineering, there's not a lot of folks who know how to do those things at an extremely high level. And the atmosphere is very collegial, and it's really, almost, it's almost like a research institution in some ways. And it's kind of weird that this like global research institution has grown up around these things because of the way that funding has flowed into blockchain. And like, I think Cosmos and Parity are two really great examples of that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the blockchain space has pushed not only cryptography development, but possibly also P2P in some way storage and like Merkle tree design forward, that if there was no blockchain and there was no like speculation on blockchain, that we may have not seen.
No. I mean, we saw Bram Cohen and BitTorrent sort of pushing forward P2P in the early 2000s. But since 2019, the Bitcoin P2P network was heavily based on the work that Bram did in BitTorrent. But since then, P2P and a lot of the cryptography stuff has all been driven forward by the blockchain community. And I think that That's something that people don't really understand from a practical perspective, but in blockchains, like there's a lot of things that we don't do well.
Yeah.
But there's some things that we do really, really well. In the P2P database consensus stuff, I think we do better than enterprises. I'll be really honest. Most enterprises
we definitely have a lot more to think through because
Yeah.
at least on the enterprises, they can just assume everyone is trustworthy. While in blockchain, I believe we still can believe most validators will be trustworthy, but there's that just like 0.05% that may cause an issue.
Totally. And, having to build systems that are able to defend against those types of threats and attacks has resulted in drastically more resilient systems. I think earlier in the call, you were talking about how reliable Tendermint is. And one of the, in my experience, that failed upgrade we had on the hub where we rolled back to a previous state and brought it up with 125 validators. If you tried to bring up a 125 node RAF cluster, I don't think you could do it.
It'd definitely be harder.
Yeah. You ever worked with a RAF cluster before?
Yeah, at the enterprise blockchain, we had to do, we got deep into DevOps and consensus there for like these private enterprises. There was a lot of like buzzwords and like enterprises, like we're basically the CEO would be like, oh, do you guys need this? And the company of course didn't need it, but it was a nice word to like put on a piece of paper. And so we had to end up building it out.
Yeah, I just Amazon put out some press, I guess maybe a couple of years ago, about getting their Paxos implementation formally verified. And, Amazon's a multi-trillion-dollar company. And we have an algorithm, a consensus algorithm called Tendermint that we also have formally verified. And we're a bunch of weirdos from all over the internet. And, that is kind of the thing that I always keep coming back to in my mind where I'm like, we got it really good over here in a lot of ways.
We really do. I mean, hats off to Jay for first thinking of everything, and definitely not only us, but a lot of the blockchain ecosystem wouldn't be where it is today without Jay and Bucky.
One of my favorite features that I've seen you drive forward for a couple of years, and there's been a number of different changes that you've made to try to make this better, but I don't think I've ever seen it fully implemented, comes from that kind of DevOps experience that you've had, which is right now there's a number of different ways that you can run a Cosmos SDK node. You can run it as an archive node. You can run it as a Sentry node. You can run it as a validator. You can run it and there's a couple other potential areas there. You've been working to try to sort of categorize that list of use cases and have standard templates to run those. Show me said feature.
Yeah, that's definitely, I mean, in this space, across different ecosystems, there's so many different node models, and running a validator myself in the early days and running nodes just in general and watching how other people run nodes, there's definitely not one size fits all. And so definitely finding what one node, let's say a data hub wants to run instead of a node that's actually participating in consensus is definitely something that I've put a lot of thought through, and we've definitely spent some time working on it. The Bee Harvest guys have recently made a pull request to do Tendermint modes, and so now when you spin up a Tendermint node, you can spin it up in full node. You can spin up as full node mode. You can spin up as validator mode, as seed mode, and so those are the three modes that you can begin with on Tendermint. But we're looking at lean archival nodes, light nodes. And so definitely just kind of expanding it, making it easier for people to run, but also have it be less resource intensive.
Yeah, I mean, the features that you worked on over the last year, like state sync and
protobuf,
state sync and the protobuf and the pruning stuff, which was heavily related to state sync, that's all of that work has been to basically enable better node management. and help validators do that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, definitely the state size growth within Tendermint is definitely something to keep in mind when working on Tendermint. And this is kind of like the biggest reason why we wanted state sync and block pruning, and even protobuf. Protobuf has helped here as well.
Yeah, it really has. Well, let's see if we have any comments here from the audience. I think that because of daylight savings time, we were a little bit early on this, so I'm not expecting a whole lot. But yeah, Marko, any last things before you run? What do you want to plug?
So I definitely want to plug Sommelier.
We're buying a winery.
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely fly from Berlin to California for that. That, and then also just keep your eyes out for new projects launching within the Cosmos and Sommelier ecosystems. There's definitely going to be some exciting stuff in the next couple months, especially airdrops to people and everything. And of course, on the Tendermint side, we're getting ready for a survey. So keep your eyes peeled for a Tendermint user survey.
What kind of questions I'm really excited about that. What kind of questions you guys asking on the user survey?
Just kind of general node operator, developer, and just kind of like how we are doing as a team. Just like if people want more information from Tendermint, more updates. Lots of Tendermint's work is kind of right now in refactor and maintenance mode before we start like diving deep into new features. So if people want more updates, maybe more blog posts, just kind of like getting a better idea of how the ecosystem's looking, not only at the Cosmos SDK, but also at Tendermint.
Yeah. Wow. That's really cool. User surveys, especially with open source software, I think it's really hard to find out where all your users are. Yeah. So I excited to see the results of that survey. Well, thank you very much, Marko, for joining me today. And let's go get back to work on this Gravity Bridge refactor. But before we run, I just want to say thank you again to Sommelier Finance for sponsoring this podcast, and Sisla and the OmniFlix Media team for helping me produce it. So thank you guys very much for your time today, and I will see you next Friday. Same bat time, same bat channel, unless daylight savings time happens again, which... So anyway, thank you guys very much, and talk next week.
Ciao, ciao. Thank you.